Caribbean Crisis Reborn. Russian warships returned to Cuba carrying hypersonic missiles, 90 miles from Florida. America responds with overwhelming force that makes 1962 look like a diplomatic disagreement. This is the confrontation that proves the Monroe Doctrine lives in the 21st century through American naval power that tolerates no threats in the Western Hemisphere. Admiral Gorshkov-class frigate Admiral Gorshkov arrives at Havana Harbor with great fanfare. Russian state media celebrates the deployment as demonstration of global reach and strategic capability. The frigate carries Zircon hypersonic missiles capable of Mach 9 velocities and 1,000-kilometer range. Russian military planners believe these weapons create deterrence through threat to American homeland that cannot be easily defended against. They're about to discover that proximity to American shores makes Russian vessels targets rather than threats when 4th Fleet arrives with Carrier Strike Group and clear mission to remove Russian military presence from Caribbean waters. Navy Power TV takes you inside the operation that reestablishes American hemispheric dominance and sends unmistakable message that Russian military adventurism stops at the edge of American maritime security zone. USS George H.W. Bush Carrier Strike Group deploys from Norfolk within hours of Russian arrival in Cuba. The mission brief is straightforward: demonstrate American capability to neutralize Russian naval presence and eliminate any potential threat to homeland. No diplomatic niceties, no extended negotiations. American military power will speak louder than diplomatic protests. The carrier group includes 4 Arleigh Burke destroyers, 2 Ticonderoga cruisers, and 2 Virginia-class attack submarines. This is overwhelming force concentration designed to leave zero ambiguity about American resolve and capability. Which American asset poses greatest threat to Russian frigate? A. Carrier aviation. Attack submarines, see Tomahawk missiles. Comment your answer. The Admiral Gorshkov represents modern Russian naval technology. 5,000 to 400 tons displacement. Sophisticated radar systems. Vertical launch cells with various missile types including the fearsome Zircon hypersonics. On paper, this is capable warship. In practice, it's single frigate the entire American carrier strike group in waters where Russia has zero support infrastructure and no realistic hope of reinforcement if conflict escalates. The strategic miscalculation is stunning. Russian leadership apparently believed the Zircon missiles provided sufficient deterrence to make American intervention unthinkable. They failed to account for American submarine capability, electronic warfare sophistication, and overwhelming numerical advantages that turn impressive individual platform into isolated target. Stay with me because what happens next demonstrates why geography matters enormously in naval warfare, and why Russian surface vessels operating in American home waters face insurmountable disadvantages against forces that train in these waters continuously. USS John Warner Virginia-class submarine shadows the Admiral Gorshkov from the moment the Russian frigate cleared the Straits of Florida. American sonar operators track every movement. American targeting systems maintain continuous firing solutions. The Russian frigate has no idea it's being followed by adversary that could sink it within minutes without warning. This is the submarine advantage that decades of acoustic quieting technology creates. Russian ships lack the sonar capability to detect modern American submarines at useful ranges, even in relatively shallow Caribbean waters. The Russian Yasen-M class submarine Kazan attempts to provide underwater escort for the surface vessels. This is Russia's most advanced attack submarine. It carries sophisticated sonar systems and modern torpedoes. Under different circumstances, it might represent serious threat, but operating in Caribbean waters against American 4th Fleet, supported by comprehensive maritime patrol aircraft coverage and advanced sonar networks, the Kazan faces impossible tactical situation. American P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft drop sonobuoy patterns that detect the Russian submarine transiting from Atlantic. USS Colorado Virginia-class submarine prosecutes the contact. The American boat positions for attack while remaining undetected. The Kazan's sonar operators never achieve detection on their American counterpart. This is the capability gap that makes Russian submarine operations in Western Hemisphere suicidal against opposition that owns the acoustic environment. Navy Power TV reveals the brutal mathematics of submarine warfare near American shores. Russian boats face comprehensive surveillance networks, multiple American submarines with superior quieting and sensors, and maritime patrol aircraft that can prosecute contacts continuously. The home field advantage creates engagement parameters where only American submarines can shoot effectively. American FA-18EF Super Hornets establish combat air patrol over the Caribbean approaches to Cuba. Russian Tu-142 maritime patrol aircraft attempting to provide surveillance support for their surface vessels are intercepted at 200 miles from Cuban airspace. The Russian aircraft are ordered to turn back. They comply. Russian air cover evaporates, leaving their surface vessels operating without overhead protection against carrier aviation that could strike at will. The psychological pressure on Russian commanders intensifies as they realize their force is isolated and vulnerable. How many Zircon missiles can Admiral Gorshkov carry? A. 8 missiles. B. 16 missiles. C. 24 missiles. Answer at end. The actual number is 16 Zircon missiles in vertical launch cells. This sounds impressive until you consider that USS George H.W. Bush Carrier Strike Group includes over 500 vertical launch cells across multiple vessels, with SM-3, SM-6, and other interceptors specifically designed to defeat hypersonic threats. Russian frigates' offensive capability is overwhelmed by American defensive depth that makes successful attack essentially impossible, even if the frigate achieved firing solution before being destroyed by American preemptive strikes. Quantity versus quality takes stark form when one side has 16 offensive missiles and the other side has 500 defensive interceptors plus overwhelming strike capability to destroy the offensive platform before weapons launch. Comment Q or L American electronic warfare aircraft begin operations near Cuban waters. EA-18G Growlers employ powerful jamming against Russian radar and communication systems. The Admiral Gorshkov's sensors are degraded by electromagnetic interference that corrupts targeting data and prevents accurate fire control solutions. Russian communications with mainland support become intermittent and unreliable. The frigate is being isolated electronically while being tracked continuously by American submarines and monitored by American aircraft. This is the integrated electronic warfare approach that makes individual platforms ineffective regardless of how sophisticated their equipment might be in sterile testing conditions. If you believe the Monroe Doctrine remains in force through American naval power, type Navy Power TV right now. The diplomatic pressure intensifies in parallel with military pressure. American government delivers ultimatum to Russian leadership. Remove the frigate and submarine from Caribbean waters within 72 hours or face forcible removal through military action. Russian state media attempts bravado, but Russian military leadership understands the tactical reality. Their vessels are outmatched and isolated. Reinforcement is impossible. Retreat is the only rational option that avoids catastrophic losses. The Admiral Gorshkov departs Havana after just 48 hours in port. Russian propaganda claims the visit was always intended to be brief. Nobody believes this fiction. The frigate retreats toward Atlantic with American submarines maintaining continuous track. The Yasen-M submarine surfaces and transits on surface back toward Russian waters under American surveillance. This is humiliation for Russian Navy that came to Caribbean expecting to demonstrate power but instead demonstrated vulnerability when facing American forces operating in their home waters with overwhelming advantages. Navy Power TV examines the strategic lessons that reverberate through Russian naval planning. Their most modern surface combatant and submarine proved inadequate to operate in Western Hemisphere against American opposition. The Zircon hypersonic missiles that Russian media portrayed as unstoppable superweapons never fired because the platforms carrying them were too vulnerable to survive long enough to employ their weapons effectively. Having impressive weapons means nothing when the platform carrying them can be destroyed before achieving firing solutions. The Monroe Doctrine enforcement through military power rather than diplomatic protest sends clear message to all nations considering military deployments in Western Hemisphere. American tolerance for foreign military presence near its shores is zero when that presence carries weapons that could threaten American homeland. The days when Soviet submarines operated freely in Caribbean during Cold War are permanently gone. American anti-submarine warfare capabilities evolved to levels where no adversary can operate covertly in Western Hemisphere waters without detection and continuous tracking by forces that maintain overwhelming tactical advantages. Regional nations observe this confrontation with satisfaction. Caribbean states and Central American nations rely on American security guarantees to maintain their independence from external military pressures. Russian retreat demonstrates that American guarantees have substance backed by military power that will respond decisively to any threats in the region. This strengthens American influence throughout the hemisphere in ways that diplomatic engagement alone could never achieve. Cuban government faces domestic questions about allowing Russian vessels that attracted American military response, creating tensions in waters where Cuba hoped to maintain peaceful commercial relationships. Future Russian requests for port access will be reconsidered, given the negative consequences of hosting vessels that provoke American military deployments. China watches this Caribbean confrontation with great interest and concern. Chinese naval planners studying options for overseas bases and deployments must now factor American responses that treat Western Hemisphere as exclusive American security zone, where foreign military presence will not be tolerated regardless of international law or freedom of navigation principles. American enforcement of hemispheric dominance through overwhelming military response creates precedent that limits Chinese options for global military expansion. Which capability proved most decisive in forcing Russian retreat? Submarine tracking, electronic warfare, or overwhelming force concentration? Drop your assessment. Technology supremacy confirmed. Admiral Gorshkov carries 16 Zircon missiles facing carrier strike group with 500-plus defensive interceptors and overwhelming strike capability. That's the answer to our quiz. Russian offensive capability is inadequate against American defensive depth, even when Russian weapons represent their most advanced technology. Can Russia develop capability to operate effectively in Western Hemisphere against American opposition? Current evidence suggests absolutely not within any realistic time frame. American advantages in submarine technology, maritime patrol aircraft, carrier aviation, and geographic proximity create insurmountable barriers to Russian naval operations near American shores. The capability gaps continue widening as American systems evolve while Russian procurement struggles with budget constraints and technological limitations. What's next for Caribbean security? Continued American naval dominance that treats Western Hemisphere as exclusive security zone where foreign military deployments will not be tolerated. Russian attempt to return to Cuba demonstrated that Cold War-era Soviet presence cannot be replicated by modern Russian Navy, facing American forces with technological and numerical superiority refined through decades of continuous operations protecting hemispheric security interests. The operational lessons from this Caribbean confrontation inform broader strategic understanding about hemispheric defense requirements. American ability to concentrate overwhelming naval power within days of potential threat appearing creates deterrence that prevents adversary deployments rather than requiring forcible removal. Future Russian or Chinese considerations about Caribbean or South American deployments must factor American response capabilities that make such operations strategically unviable regardless of host nation willingness to provide port access or basing rights. The submarine warfare dimension deserves particular emphasis as deciding factor in this confrontation. Russian surface vessels might have posed challenges if supported by effective submarine screen that prevented American submarine attacks and created uncertainty about underwater threat environment. But Russian submarine proved as detectable and vulnerable as their surface vessels when operating in waters where American maritime patrol aircraft and submarine forces maintain overwhelming surveillance and prosecution capability. This underwater advantage creates asymmetric warfare situation, favoring defenders with acoustic superiority. American investment in quiet submarine technology and advanced sonar systems pays dividends in scenarios exactly like this Caribbean crisis, where detecting and tracking adversary submarines before they achieve firing positions determines whether surface vessels can operate safely or must constantly defend against underwater threats they cannot locate. Russian submarine technology lags American capabilities by estimated 15 to 20 years in quieting and sensor performance. This gap translates directly to tactical disadvantages that make Russian submarine operations near American shores effectively impossible against opposition with comprehensive anti-submarine warfare networks. The electronic warfare aspects of this engagement reveal another area where Russian capabilities prove inadequate against American systems. Refined through decades of development and operational testing, Russian frigate sensors degraded by American jamming could not maintain targeting solutions necessary for effective weapons employment. Russian communications disrupted by American electronic attack could not coordinate with Homeland support or other deployed forces. This electronic warfare dominance creates information denial that makes adversary platforms ineffective regardless of weapons they carry. The diplomatic aftermath of the confrontation strengthens American position throughout the Western Hemisphere. Nations that might have considered hosting Russian or Chinese military deployments now understand such decisions invite American military responses that create problems exceeding any benefits foreign military presence might provide. American willingness to employ overwhelming force to remove threats near Homeland demonstrates commitment that diplomatic rhetoric alone could never convey effectively. The domestic political impact in the United States proves significant. American public strongly supports military action that removes foreign threats from proximity to Homeland. The Fourth Fleet's successful operation reinforces public confidence in American naval power and validates defense spending on capabilities that protect national security through decisive action, rather than extended diplomatic negotiations that might leave threats in place while adversaries exploit time delays. Russian domestic reaction combines propaganda claims of successful mission with private military acknowledgement of tactical failure. Russian naval leadership must explain to political masters why expensive modern vessels retreated after brief port visit rather than establishing sustained presence that propaganda promised. The capability gaps revealed by this operation will drive Russian naval procurement decisions, but budget constraints prevent rapid capability improvements that would enable future Caribbean operations against American opposition. The Fourth Fleet mission validates continued American investment in maintaining overwhelming naval superiority in home waters. Carrier strike groups, attack submarines, and maritime patrol aircraft create layered capabilities that make American shores effectively immune to foreign naval threats, regardless of how sophisticated individual adversary weapon systems might appear in isolation. Integration and experience. Trump isolated technological achievements when defending homeland waters against adversaries lacking support infrastructure and realistic reinforcement options. The Caribbean confrontation establishes template for future American responses to foreign military presence in the Western Hemisphere. Overwhelming force concentration, continuous tracking and surveillance. Electronic warfare dominance. Clear diplomatic ultimatums backed by credible military threat. This approach removes adversary presence without requiring actual combat, while demonstrating capability and resolve that deters future attempts. American naval power enforces Monroe Doctrine through actions that speak definitively about hemispheric security priorities and American willingness to employ military force protecting those priorities against any nation attempting to establish threatening presence near American shores regardless of diplomatic justifications or international law arguments about freedom of navigation and sovereign rights to accept foreign military vessels in their ports. Subscribe to Navy Power TV, where elite naval power meets cutting-edge technology proving Monroe Doctrine enforcement continues through overwhelming American naval capabilities that tolerate no foreign military threats in Western Hemisphere. Superior fleets, advanced weapons. Hit notification for analysis showing why American hemispheric dominance remains absolute through submarine superiority, electronic warfare mastery, and force concentration that defeats adversary deployments before they achieve any strategic objectives that might threaten American interests or regional stability.